She had been on her knees scrubbing the grout between the tiles of the executive bathroom when the new cleaner knocked the mop bucket into the corridor, and nobody came to help him. She heard it from where she was, the hollow clang of the bucket hitting the marble floor of the 14th floor corridor, the thin rush of soapy water spreading fast, the silence that followed, which was the sound of 23 people at their desks deciding it was not their problem. She set down the brush. She stood up. She walked out of the executive bathroom and into the corridor and found the old man already on his knees, pressing a cloth into the water with both hands, trying to stop it from reaching the glass partition of the conference room where a meeting was about to begin. He was somewhere between 60 and 70, with a kind of face that holds its age quietly. His uniform was the same pale gray as hers, the Stellar Services contract cleaner uniform, 2 sizes too large on him. The name badge above the breast pocket reading simply, Kofi. His hands moved fast for a man his age. He did not look up when she crouched beside him. She did not wait for him to. They had the water cleared in 4 minutes. She wrung the last cloth out in the bucket and straightened up and said, "It happens. The wheel on that bucket has been loose for 3 weeks." He looked up at her then. She was already walking back to the executive bathroom. She did not know, at that moment, what the badge above her own breast pocket would mean to the man still kneeling on the floor of the corridor. But the man on the floor already knew exactly who she was. Her name was Abina Mensah. She was 41 years old, 5 feet 4 inches, and had been a contract cleaner with Stellar Services for 9 years. She smelled faintly of the eucalyptus concentrate she used on the bathroom fixtures and something underneath it that was simply clean, the smell of a woman who washed carefully before coming to work and brought that discipline with her into every surface she touched. Her uniform was the same pale gray as everyone else's, but hers sat differently because she pressed it, not with an iron she owned, with a cool iron she borrowed from her landlady on Thursday evenings in exchange for helping hang the laundry, because pressing the uniform was not a vanity. It was a decision about what she was going to bring into a building that had never once put her name on any of its glass walls. She had been assigned to the 14th floor of Mensa Kwai Tower on Cantonments Road in Accra for 6 of her 9 years with Stellar Services. The 14th floor was the executive floor, the CEO's suite at the eastern corner, the boardroom with the glass walls and the view of the sea, the corridors that smelled of carpet cleaner, and the faint burn of expensive coffee and something else. Quieter, that was simply the smell of people who did not worry about money in the way other people worried about money. Abina knew this floor the way you know a place you have spent 6 years learning in silence, where the grout darkened first, which plant near the boardroom dropped leaves on the carpet on Wednesdays, which executive left crumbs under their desk, and which one was so careful there was never anything to clean at all. She had a 14-year-old son named Tobena, who was in his 3rd year at Accra Academy. She had a folder at home in the single room she rented on Abosi Okai Road, a red folder with a plastic cover, the kind that cost 3 cedis from the stationery sellers near the traffic light. And inside it was Tobena's school report from every term since he enrolled, and a printed copy of the Accra Academy scholarship terms and conditions, and a handwritten list of what the school fees would cost from year 4 through year 6, and a second handwritten calculation that showed how many months of her Stellar Services salary it would take to cover it if the scholarship did not renew. She had read that second calculation enough times to know it without opening the folder. She kept the folder under the mattress on Tobena's side of the room, because that was the driest part. The object she carried to work every day was a small bottle of hand cream, not for vanity, but because the eucalyptus concentrate dried her knuckles past bleeding if she did not use it. The bottle had been a gift from her sister in Kumasi, who had sent it in a brown envelope 2 years ago, with a note that said, "Your hands work hard. Help them." The bottle was almost finished. She had been using it carefully since it reached the last third, rationing a thin layer on each hand instead of 2 layers, because she had not found the same brand for sale in Accra and did not want to write to her sister asking for another. Her sister had her own expenses. This was her dignity moment. She did not complain about the eucalyptus. She did not ask Stellar Services for gloves of a better quality, though the ones they supplied left a rash on her left wrist by the end of the week. She showed up at 6:30 every morning. She pressed her uniform on Thursdays. She scrubbed the grout in the executive bathroom to a standard that nobody above her on that floor was ever going to notice. And she did it because she had decided 9 years ago that the work deserved that from her even if nobody else was measuring. One skill she had, which was not on any form Stellar Services had ever asked her to fill out, was that she could identify within 40 seconds what was wrong with any cleaning machine on the floor. The industrial vacuum on the 14th floor had been making a grinding sound for 2 months before anyone reported it. She had mentioned it to her supervisor in the 4th week. He had logged it in the 6th week. The repair came in the 9th week. In the time between her report and the repair, she had cleaned the carpets with a push broom and a lint roller because the grinding sound damaged the motor if you ran it too long, and a damaged motor meant a 6-week wait for the replacement part. And 6 weeks without a vacuum on the executive floor was not something she was going to put in anyone's report as her fault. Nobody had asked how the carpet stayed clean during those 9 weeks. She had not mentioned it. The man called Kofi returned to the 14th floor the next morning at 6:28. Abina was already at the supply closet signing out her materials when he came through the service entrance. He carried his mop the way new cleaners carry mops, slightly out to the side rather than vertical. The way you carry something you haven't yet learned is easier to hold close. She noticed this. She didn't comment on it. By 7:00, he had knocked a framed notice off the wall near the service lift. He picked it up and stood with it in both hands for a moment, reading the front. It was a list of the building's cleaning protocols, the approved chemical concentrations, the schedule for deep cleans of the executive washrooms, the contact number for the Stellar Services supervisor on duty. He held it the way someone holds a document they are reading for the first time, but are pretending they have read before. She walked past him with her cart and said, without stopping, "The hook on the left is loose. It needs a thicker pin. I've put a piece of folded cardboard behind the nail to hold it. Press the bottom of the frame when you hang it back." She was already around the corner when she heard the frame go back on the wall. She did not hear it fall again. At 8:15, when the executives began arriving, men and women in suits that cost more than Abina's monthly salary, carrying bags that cost more than her quarterly salary, speaking into phones in the low, unhurried way of people who know their calls will be taken. Kofi was cleaning the windows at the eastern end of the corridor with a squeegee he was holding at the wrong angle. She could see from 3 meters away that he was going to leave streaks. She walked up to him and took the squeegee from his hand, adjusted the angle of her wrist, demonstrated 2 strokes, and gave it back. He tried. The stroke was better. She said, "Keep your elbow here, not here." She touched his elbow once with 2 fingers and moved on. Mr. Gerald Osai, the executive director of finance, walked past during this exchange. He did not look at either of them. At 10:30, the coffee machine in the executive kitchenette overflowed. Kofi was the one who found it. He called out for Abina specifically, not for the supervisor, not for anyone else, for her by name from her badge, and she came and dealt with it in 6 minutes, including wiping the underside of the machine where the overflow had tracked into a space that would mold by Thursday if it wasn't dried properly. When it was done, Kofi said, "You're very good at this." She was wringing a cloth out over the sink. She said, "It's just the coffee machine." He said, "No. I mean at all of it." She glanced at him. He was looking at her with the focused attention of a man who was not making conversation. She turned back to the sink. She said, "You'll be fine once you learn the floor." She left the kitchenette and did not think about it again until the following week, when she understood that she should have. On the Wednesday of the second week, a memo went out from the office of the CEO, a man named Al Kolade Adeyemi Bright, whose name appeared on the glass panel beside the door of the eastern corner suite in raised silver letters, and who Abina had seen in person exactly 4 times in 6 years, each time briefly and from across the corridor. The memo said that due to a restructuring of the building's contracted services, Stellar Services' 14th floor contract was under review and a decision would be communicated within 30 days. Abina read this on the printed copy her supervisor left in the supply closet. She stood in the supply closet for 1 minute. Then she went out and continued the morning schedule. Her supervisor, a man named Dubem, called her at 12:45 on her mobile. He said that the review was routine and she shouldn't worry. He said it with the speed of a man who had already looked at his own numbers and was worried. She said she understood and hung up. She went to the eastern corridor and cleaned the windows she had scheduled for that afternoon. The sea was visible on a clear day from the 14th floor, a flat gray-blue line at the edge of the sky, between the buildings of East Legan and the horizon. She had never mentioned to anyone that she found it settling to look at. She looked at it now for 11 seconds, then turned back to the window. The Accra Harmattan had arrived early that year. By Thursday of the second week, the air on Cantonments Road had the fine, dry quality of dust held in suspension, and the windows she had cleaned on Tuesday already carried a haze. She cleaned them again, not in the schedule, but she logged it anyway. Date, time, reason, the specific panel numbers in her own shorthand. She had learned 9 years ago that the only protection a person in her position has is an accurate record of their own work. That Thursday evening she took the number 8 shared taxi from Cantonments to Abasi Okai Road. Tobena was not home when she arrived, at his study group, Tuesdays and Thursdays, back by 8:30. She made kenki and fried fish. She set the table for 2. She opened the red folder. The scholarship renewal decision was due in 6 weeks. The school had written in March to say that Tobena's average of 83.7 put him in the qualifying range, but that the fund pool was under review due to a donor withdrawal and the number of awards might be reduced. It did not say by how much. She had called the bursar's office in April and again in June. Both times, the decision had not yet been made. She did not tell Tobena any of this. She had not told him that the scholarship was uncertain. She had not told him about the contract review at Stellar Services. She had not told him that she was running 2 calculations simultaneously, in the red folder and in her head, trying to find a version of the numbers that worked if both things went wrong at the same time. There was no version that worked. She closed the folder when she heard his key in the door and put it back under the mattress. He came in. He was taller than she expected, every few weeks. This was still a thing that surprised her, the way children accumulate height between one ordinary evening and the next. He said, "Mum, are you okay?" She said, "I'm tired. It was a long week." She served the fish. "How was the study group?" He said, "Good. We finished the chemistry module." They ate. Outside, a generator hummed somewhere 2 streets over. A baby was crying in the compound next door, and then wasn't. She washed the dishes after he went to study. She used the hand cream, slightly less than a full measure, 1 more conservation, and she did not let herself feel the full weight of the calculation she was running. She just washed the dishes and dried her hands carefully and went to bed at 10:30. On the Friday of the second week, when she arrived at 6:30, Nana Asante from the Stellar Services Day team was standing outside the service entrance with her phone in her hand and her bag already over one shoulder. Nana had been on the 14th floor team for 3 years. She had started 4 months after Abina reorganized the supply closet and had never once moved the bleach back to the wrong shelf. She was 28 years old with a daughter in primary school and an expression, that morning, that said she had already decided something. She said, "Abina, you heard about Clean Pros?" Abina said, "I heard about the review." Nana said, "No, not the review. They've already decided." One of the girls on the 8th floor said the operations manager told their supervisor on Wednesday, "Clean Pros comes in next month, 12% below our rate." "Done," Abina looked at her. She said, "That's not official." Nana said, "When has it ever been official first?" She put her phone in her bag. "I've already sent my CV to 2 places. You should do the same." She went through the service entrance. Abina stood outside it for 15 seconds. The Harmattan dust moved in the early light like something looking for somewhere to settle. She went inside. At 9 Tolo that morning, she passed the glass partition of the boardroom where Gerald Osai and 3 other executives were in a meeting. She was pushing her cart along the corridor on the other side of the glass. Through the partition, she could see the laptop screens, the printed documents, the cups of coffee that had been brought up by someone else and placed at each seat. On the screen at the head of the table was a presentation. She could not read the slides at that distance, but she could see that the heading on the front page included the words Contracted Services Review. Nobody in the boardroom looked up as she passed. She pushed her cart to the end of the corridor and turned toward the eastern windows and cleaned them in the direction the Harmattan was coming from, north to south, so she was always cleaning into clean glass rather than into what the cloth had already lifted. If this story is sitting in your chest the way I think it is, subscribe before we go further. Because what Abina does next, when she finds Kofi in the supply closet at 4:47 that afternoon, is the thing nobody in that building expected, including Kofi. She found him standing in the supply closet with the Stellar Services cleaning protocol binder open in his hands. He was not reading it the way a new employee reads a manual. He was reading it the way an engineer reads a report, scanning and marking. Turning back to reread, his left thumb holding 3 pages at once. He didn't hear her come in. She said, "That's the 2021 version. There's an updated one in the blue folder on the second shelf. The chemicals on page 14 changed in March." He looked up. He looked at her for a moment. Then he set the binder down on the shelf and said, "What would you change if you were writing it?" She stood in the doorway. She looked at him. She said, "That's not my job." He said, "I'm asking what you'd change." She waited. Then she said, "The deep clean rotation for the executive washrooms is scheduled for the 15th and last day of each month. But the grout in the executive bathroom near the boardroom is porous. Different tile specification from the others, probably installed at a different time. It discolors faster. It needs a cycle of 10 days, not 15. The current schedule means we're always cleaning it 1 week after it's already past where it should be." She paused. "The mop heads on this floor should be replaced every 3 weeks, not 4. 4 weeks is fine for the lower floors. Up here with the foot traffic from client visits and the carpet to tile transitions, you get cross-contamination in week 4 that the protocol doesn't account for." She stopped. He said, "What else?" She looked at him steadily. She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I want to know." She studied him for 3 seconds. Then she said, The supply closet on the 14th floor is the smallest in the building, and it has the highest materials usage. On delivery days, the stock is placed in the order the delivery driver prefers, which is not the order of frequency of use. I reorganized it in 2022, so the daily items are at eye level and the monthly items are on the top shelf. If you restore the original layout after any delivery, you add 11 minutes to every morning setup, and someone will eventually rush and knock the concentrated bleach off the top shelf. She paused. It happened once before. I was the one who cleaned it up. He closed the protocol binder. He looked at her for a long time. He said, "How long have you been on this floor?" She said, 6 years. He said, "And before that?" She said, 3 years on floors 8 through 11. He nodded slowly. He said, "Thank you, Abina." He left the supply closet. She stood there for a moment, looking at the shelf. Then she moved the bleach from the position the delivery driver had left it and put it back where it belonged. The call from Dubem came on a Thursday morning, 8 days before the 30-day review period was due to end. He said the contract had not been renewed. The building was moving to a different provider, a firm called Clean Pros Ghana, which had come in 12% below Stellar Services' rate. The 14th floor team would finish out the remaining 7 days and then exit the contract. References would be provided. He said this in a flat voice that told her he had already made 6 identical calls that morning. She said she understood. She hung up. She completed her shift. She pressed her uniform that Thursday as she always did, because she had 6 days remaining and they were the same as any other 6 days. On the Friday, when she arrived at 6:30, there was a different energy on the floor. The other cleaners on the Stellar Services team moved with the particular quietness of people who know something is ending. Nobody said much. The work was done. At 10:14 that morning, the door to the CEO's suite opened, and a woman in a tailored blue suit came out and walked to Abena and said, "Mr. Adeyemi Bright would like to see you. Now, please." Abena set the cloth she was holding on the cart. She pressed her hands flat on the sides of her uniform. She followed the woman to the eastern corner suite. The suite was large and faced the sea. There was no desk visible from the doorway, only a long conference table with 8 chairs along it, 2 leather chairs near the window, and a man standing at the window with his back to her. He turned when she came in. She recognized him in the 3 seconds it took for the door to close behind her. He was wearing a dark blue suit now, not the pale gray uniform. His name badge was gone, but the hands were the same, the ones that had moved fast across the flooded corridor on the first morning. The face was the same face. 62 years old, she now knew, though she had estimated 65. Chief Executive Officer, Mensa Kwai Properties and Holdings Group. Al Kolade Adeyemi Bright. She did not speak. She waited. He said, "I owe you an explanation." She said, "No, sir, you don't owe me anything." He said, "I've been doing this for 22 years, going into the companies, the buildings, the floors. Not to catch people doing wrong. I gave up on that kind of test a long time ago. People perform when they think they're being watched. What you learn from a performance is only how well someone can perform." He moved from the window and sat in one of the 2 chairs, leaving the other open. She did not sit. "I do it to find out who a person is when they don't know anyone is watching, when there's nothing to gain from being kind. When the man on the floor of the corridor is just an old man who knocked over a bucket, and the 23 people at their desks have already decided it's not their problem." She looked at him. She said, "You've been here the whole week?" He said, 9 days. She said nothing. He said, I've been doing this since my mother died. She was a cleaner, not in this building, in the old Novotel on Liberation Road, before they renovated it. She worked there for 27 years. She told me once that in 27 years, 3 people had spoken to her like she was a person whose name they wanted to know. He stopped. I became what I became, and I still think about that number. 3 in 27 years. Abina stood in the middle of the room and listened. He said the contract review was real. CleanPros did come in at 12% below, but the contract has not been awarded to them. I put a hold on the decision this morning. She said, I don't want a contract renewed on my account. He said, it won't be. It'll be renewed because the 14th floor has run at a 34% lower materials waste rate than any other floor in this building for the last 3 years, which I only found out about last Tuesday when I went through the Stellar Services billing records myself, and the reason for that rate is sitting in a supply closet, reorganized by someone who doesn't appear in any of those records by name. She was very still. He said, I want to offer you a position. Not with Stellar Services. Directly with Mensa Kwai, Facilities Operations Manager for this building. It's a supervisory role. You would oversee all contracted cleaning services across all 17 floors, manage the service standards audits, and report directly to the operations director. He paused. The salary is 4 times what Stellar Services is currently paying you. The room was quiet. Outside, 14 floors below, the city was making the sound the city makes at 10:14 on a Friday morning. She said, Why? He said, Because someone who reorganizes a supply closet in 2022 and maintains that reorganization for 3 years without being asked, who cleans grout to a standard nobody above her is measuring, who teaches a stranger to hold a squeegee correctly with no reason to accept that it's the right thing to do, that person is not a cleaner. That person is running a facility. I just want to make the paperwork match the reality. She looked at the sea through the window behind him. It was the same flat gray blue she had been looking at from the corridor for 6 years. She said, My son is at Accra Academy. He's in 3rd year. The scholarship renewal is not confirmed for 4th year. He said, I know. I asked your supervisor for your file this morning. She said, Then you know the calculation I've been running. He said, I do. He paused. Mensa Kwai has an education support fund for employees' children in secondary and tertiary education. It's not a loan, it's a benefit tied to the employment contract. If your son qualifies by his school performance, and from what I read in that file he does, the remaining fees through his final year are covered. She stood for a long time without speaking. He said, quietly, The only question is whether you want the position. She said, I'll need to think about it. He said, Of course. She said, By Monday. He said, Monday is fine. She turned and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle. She turned back once. She said, Your mother. What was her name? He said, Constance. She nodded. She opened the door and went back to her cart in the corridor. She picked up the cloth she had set down at 10:14. She finished the corridor. She was the last Stellar Services cleaner to leave the 14th floor that evening at 6:02 p.m. By the following Friday, Abena Mensa's name appeared for the first time on any of the glass walls of Mensa Kwai Tower, on the staff directory panel in the lobby, floor 14, beneath the heading Facilities Operations. It was printed in the same font as every other name on the panel. She did not point it out to anyone, but on the morning it was installed, she stood in front of it for 31 seconds before she went to the service lift. Gerald Osei, the executive director of finance who had walked past her and Kofi without looking at either of them, attended the mandatory facilities management briefing the following Tuesday. She ran that briefing. He sat in the third row when she explained the new deep clean rotation schedule for the executive washrooms, 10 days instead of 15 for the boardroom adjacent bathroom. With the reasoning documented, he wrote it down. He did not look up while he was writing. The Stellar Services contract was renewed at a rate 3% higher than the previous year, with a new performance clause that Abina had drafted herself over 2 evenings at the kitchen table in the room on Abassi Okai Road, with Tobena doing his homework at the other end of the table and the red folder open beside her laptop for reference. Tobena's scholarship renewal letter arrived on a Thursday. He read it at 6:47 in the morning while she was making tea. She watched his face from across the room and did not say anything. He looked up. He said, "Mum." She said, "I know." She handed him the tea. Kolade had thought he was testing his staff. He had done this 22 times in 22 years, in buildings and companies across Accra and Lagos and Abuja, and in all that time he had learned one true thing from every version of this test. He had never once learned it from the people who passed. What he had learned, every time, was the same thing his mother had tried to tell him the year he graduated and came home with a degree certificate in a cardboard sleeve, certain that he now understood how the world worked. She had been sitting at the kitchen table in her cleaning uniform, the one she pressed every Thursday evening, and she had said, "Kolade, the people who built this world are not the ones you are going to meet in the offices. They are the ones who clean the offices. And they will never tell you that, because it is not in their nature to say what they have built. They just keep building." He had been 24 years old. He had heard her. He had not yet understood her. He understood her now. He had understood her, for the first time, in the 3 seconds it took for a woman in a pale gray uniform to kneel beside him on a wet corridor floor and press a cloth into the water without asking a single question about why he was there or what it was worth to help him. You can dress a person in whatever you like. You can put them at any desk, in any corridor, at any level of any building. You can give them a name badge that says one thing and a life that says something completely different. What you cannot change is what they carry, the decision, made long before you arrived in their corridor, about who they are going to be when no one is watching and there is nothing to gain. That decision is the most permanent thing a person owns. It cannot be contracted out. It cannot be reviewed. It survives every restructuring. If you were Abina and you had spent 9 years building something in a building that didn't know your name, what would you have done differently? Nothing? Something? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.